Hi, I'm Mitchell McCurdy, and we're at Marinison Estates Winery. And this is where I am the winemaker for, but I also have my virtual label as Eclectics being sold and produced through their cellar.
And we're sort of Niagara on the Lake, kind of between Niagara Lake and Niagara Falls, a little space in there. Is it all considered Niagara on the Lake then?
It is all considered Niagara on the Lake, but yet there is the separation of falls. You just mentioned your counterpart, so that would be almost the borderline where you go into Niagara Falls. And if, for anybody who's familiar with wine, we're actually in the 4 Mile Creek sub-appellation, so that gives you a little bit more idea. We're really close to Inniskillen Wineries just down the road, as well as Pondview.
So right in the heart of, all production in the area here as well. Is there a reason why cider came out of here?
Well, I actually, making wine for so long and then just being passionate about all things beverage related, and that's kind of the thesis behind Collab Wine and Beverage, which is the home for all the virtual labels that we're going to be talking about today. Mostly Perry is the big reason I went for that. Is I had some Perry in Victoria, BC, back in my youth. It was a gin botanical Perry on keg or on tap in a keg, and it was just absolutely fantastic. Blew me away. So I had to go and make it, or at least try and get close to repeating that experience. The tequila Perry just kind of fell into the same realm because I had more pear juice than I wanted to just go down with one. There's a couple pear trees back there as well, but most of the 27 acres is all grapes at that point. So cider actually and Perry let me branch out, be a little bit more creative while still making a lot of wine for Marinison. And I am, as I mentioned earlier, going in to make some Syrah Rosé for my virtual brand as well. So just spicing it up, I guess, is the way I would say that.
So what are the brands then? Because you mentioned a few. What are they exactly?
So Collab Wine and Beverage is the overarching. You can find us on DrinkCollab.ca. That houses Fogelar Wines, which is done by my boss, Mark Piester. Old Ton, which is cider, all things sparkling. So he does cider, Perry, as well as some sparkling wines, Pinot Noir sparkling in a Charmat method, but bottled unfined, unfiltered. There's also Maynard, which is done by Yvonne Irving, which is she's the assistant winemaker at Creekside currently, and they make some pretty delicious. I assume you've had the Rude, yeah.
We were there earlier today.
Oh, perfect. And then there's another gentleman I work with named Jeff Moot, and he's just you can find his stuff on the website, but he hasn't done his big official launch. He's done a soft launch of Divergence Wines, which is all custom wines done by him. Again, through the winery license here. And so it's this whole idea that we're all kind of working together, which is why I'm going to be pouring you some of Ramsey's products from the Old Ton and just talking about that, because it's just, we find that a bunch of heads coming together and working together ends up making better products at the end of the day.
Yeah, so why don't we pour something, tell us a little bit about it, and then tell us how everybody got together, because I'm assuming there's some sort of an interesting story there.
Yeah, so you were driving back and forth between both sides of the Niagara region, and I will say that's very normal for me as well, some for you as well. So this is the Old Ton Cider. I like to call it the OG. It's just one of the first things he made. Just buying apples, pressing them, barrel fermenting them, and then going down into bottle with yeast and sugar to bottle condition them. So the whole kind of thesis behind Old Ton is doing things in an older style, a little bit more traditional, if you will. And so this is one that's been on his list for a while, but as I mentioned, when we run out of product, got to make it again. So this is actually just bottled this year, so new to the shelves, even though it's the rendition of the older style. The other thing beside that is the Perry. Do you want to wait to go into that?
Yeah, we'll go into that in a minute. So,
yeah.
have you noticed much difference between year to year on the product? Or, I mean, I'm assuming you've tried to keep it as close as possible, but there's always that challenge.
Well, there's the argument for consistency, and like consumers appreciate that, and even me as a winemaker, I want consistency in products. But there's also that element of Niagara region having such variable weather that from one year to the next, things don't taste exactly the same. And so even if you have full control over your fruit and you're managing your vineyard or orchard in certain ways, you're still going to have a little bit variety from vintage to vintage, but utilizing the same yeast, again, barrel aging, you can actually hold barrels back and then blend them into the new vintage moving forward. So it actually allows you, even in cider production, to kind of maintain a little bit of consistency. And Ramsey is doing a little bit more funky stuff, one-offs, but with this, we're going for consistency. So dry, crisp, delicious apple cider is kind of the feeling behind that. And then again, having the bottle conditioning, that nice yeasty aroma, it actually helps it age and last in bottle for quite some time.
So for someone who's not familiar with the term bottle condition, what does that mean if you were to pick up something that was bottle conditioned versus something else?
Yeah, so I usually go from the wine lingo term. Traditional method, sparkling, is when you put yeast, wine, and sugar into a bottle and the fermentation happens in bottle. But bottle conditioning is a very beer term, and it's very common in the brewery business. Where you're basically putting, again, sugar, yeast, and beer, or in this case, cider, into the bottle. The yeast is going to eat the sugar, ferment it to dryness, and then when the yeast eats the sugar, it makes CO2 as well as alcohol. So you're only putting a little bit of sugar in there, so you're not really getting a big change in your alcohol, but you're getting at least what we refer to atmospheres, 2 to 3 atmospheres of pressure inside that bottle, which is kind of where we find the perfect carbonation, which is about like 9 to 12 grams per liter of sugar is kind of what I shoot for in my Perry's and what Ramsey's going for in the ciders as well.
And then any less and you're not going to get that sparkle that you get, and anything more you might have to add something on the top to keep it on or hope it doesn't blow up on you.
Mostly the big fear about going above that is you lose, like you pop the cap and then it's all over everywhere. And that's just, once you get above that pressure, having any sediment in there is just going to create nucleation points and it just gushes. So the big thing is having a consumer buy something and then lose half the bottle when they open it, even if they did chill it down. I find it a big issue in some pet nats, not everybody, because some people are keeping that in mind, but as soon as you go down a bottle dirty, if you will, with any particle matter in there, if you're over a certain carbonation level, it's gonna end messy, and we don't want to sell you a product and then have it all over your kitchen floor or your shirt or whatever, right?
And because we're just talking a little bit about production stuff for people who are interested, these are unfiltered, and then others that are offered are filtered. What does the filtering do? It just pulls those particles out, correct?
Yeah, that's a good. Filtering changes a lot of things about products, whether it's wine, cider, all of that stuff. It just changes what's going on, but the main purpose is to remove particulate matter. And now things that are in bottle, like the russet we have here that's clear, that would have just been filtered into a bright tank. And so basically you can do the same method, except instead of a bottle, the fermentation happens in the tank, and then we can filter through pressure, and then you end up with clean, crystal clear cider on the other end, and then just bottle it under pressure. So it's just a little cleaner. Definitely nothing wrong if you find that sediment in the bottle. The whole purpose is, again, traditional styles. It's been done tons of time. And in my opinion, that yeast in that bottle is going to, again, extend your shelf life. It's going to help it age. And personally, I like sour beers with just tons of haze in them. Hazy IPAs, it's a big thing. And I don't know, I really like it and find it impacts the palate in a beneficial way.
And interestingly enough, last year they finally allowed unfiltered cider in Quebec, if you weren't aware of that. It had been all the way up until that point. So there's now a big boom of Quebec-style ciders that are unfiltered and hazy and so on.
That's actually really, I didn't know that, and I think that's almost comical because a lot of the natural wine craze or unfiltered wine craze started in Quebec, and it's almost kind of comical that their ciders the other way around. I know that one of their rules is you can't use any ground apples in the production of cider, but I believe that's Canada-wide, which is interesting because actually at Christmas time, the group of us, which we were talking about going into how we all met, I'll just finish the spiel and then we'll get into that. We tasted some Normandy cider, and that's very much traditionally ground apples, kieved and then fermented, and then they end up sweet, delicious. You get a little bit of that moldy funk in there, which is it's appropriate for it. I'm not trying to turn anybody off trying them. If you can find them at the LCBO, you should go give it a try. Again, I'm very much support local and all that stuff, but it's good to inform your opinion on delicious things around the world.
Bethany's go-to is the Normandies as well, so it definitely worth a try. But as you said, quite different, like trying different types of products, you have to go through a bunch of stuff and keep your palate open when you try something new, because you might run into something very different.
Yeah. So then, with that tangent, I'll just go right into how we all met. Mark Peaster is my boss, but also was my professor at Brock University. So I went through the enology and viticulture program at Brock, which is hence the love for wine and all of that. And then just liking all beverages, fell in love with cider along the way. Ramsey also went through the Brock program. And then Nick Pappas, who's our brand and marketing manager, also went through the program. He was actually in some of the same classes as me, where Mark and Ramsey were a little bit closer. But Mark and Fred DeProfio, who's the winemaker over at Pondview, were doing contract winemaking together. So, and then Ramsey came on and they all worked together. I started with them in 2018, so it was mostly just I had gone to him after finishing school and said, I'm looking for a job. I hear you guys make lots of wine and other fun things. As he had been consulting for a couple different cideries at that time, and I wanted to make cider, I wanted to make wine. It seemed like a good versatile option. So mostly it was through the hub of Brock, but there's no, it's not a minimum requirement.
Rule, yeah.
Actually, our cellar hand here is from Niagara College, and she's absolutely wonderful, smart lady, works hard, does a good job, and we're looking at hiring on another person from the college as well. So it's not exclusive to Brock students. But so mostly that's how we met, and then working on wine together, and then we kind of always dreamed of virtual labels. Mark started Fogelar in 2014, and then Old Ton established in 2016. So that was Mark and Ramsey working together. Again, this idea that we're not able to buy an orchard with lack of funds and insane land prices. But it's also more economical and environmentally friendly to fill capacity in a winery that already exists. And so that's what we'll do, and I'll take you a little bit around that as well after we pop open the Perry. But yeah, that's kind of how we all met, and then just the strength of working together and going through harvests. And we basically did contract winemaking for a couple different places. Dark Horse Winery out in Grand Bend. This product right here is actually from Chudley Entertainment Farm. If you're familiar with them, they're just opening their cidery recently, and Mark's been consulting, and I've been working with them as well. Although it's almost hands off from us. They are definitely doing a lot of the work, and the guy behind that, Will, is very passionate and really good at what he does. Not on the DrinkCollab site, but I just wanted to talk about it because it's a pretty cool thing that we got there.
Well, why don't we open up the Perry, and then you can. I know the difference of what a Perry is, but why don't you very quickly go sort of through that, and then we can circle ourselves back into sort of the next things. I think part of the issue that we're running into, obviously, and seeing now, and one of the reasons why it probably drove you a little bit more towards the online option was the 5 acre rule. In Ontario, now that's abolished, essentially, and without consultation, and some interesting changes which have impacted a few. For example, Grey and Gold cider up in Grey County, if I recall correctly, they got approved 2 days before COVID hit. So they just got their 5 acres in and had a day or two, and then COVID hit, and then that was waived for the time and has gone away. Is that going to change your business model, or do you think you might see others following along with what you're doing?
Yeah, well, so the 5 acre rule, it's very I don't want to say convoluted, but it kind of is at this point. And so it's existed for wineries forever. Now, cideries have the benefit that they don't need it. But you could also make cider inside a winery. You just have to have a portion of your production, which is fine because we're doing small batch things here. And then inside of a winery that has not large production, but large enough that it doesn't really affect any legality there. It's fine. And I hope that the people who are growing their own orchards and did all that work aren't hurt about it, because I think it's awesome to say we manage our own orchard, we have all the fruit on site, and we're doing this. I don't think it takes away from that, but it opens up for breweries to now put down ciders and do all of that. So I'm very much of the belief that there's more Ontario cider on the market. The more people talk about Ontario cider, the more exciting people are to go grab it and all that jazz. So it's not really going to change our business model per se, because we were already doing it under the winery license, and I'm not planning on going and popping up a shop downtown and making cider there, because we've already got, again, all the things kind of figured out. We've got the full production facility, so it doesn't really make sense. There's a lot of capital even when you take out the 5 acre rule. Mm-hmm. So my hope is it just gets more people talking about Canadian beverages in general, but I understand why some people might be a little hurt planting 5 acres going into COVID and then things changing. But I think the one thing that is problematic about making alcohol in Ontario is how highly regulated it and how restrictive it is. It's very restrictive for small people to even enter the market, because, the capital lot of 5 acres of orchard, and that's not even including the building that you're going to build, and then the wastewater treatment you got to figure out, and then all of the equipment to actually have a functioning facility, right? So I think it opens the doors for a lot of people to start experimenting, and hopefully it just gets people talking about cider more.
And we did see quite a boom for cider, especially in Ontario. When we first got into this in 2015, there was maybe 60 or 70 people that are making it. We're now over 120 in the province, and countrywide we're over 370. So there is that sort of push going forward, but there's been sort of ebb and flow in the way that the pandemic has impacted people. In general, and this is a general statement, of course, it tends to be that the first year of the pandemic was actually decently strong for cider producers, because the international market didn't have an ability to respond. So then people went looking local and to support local. And then 2021 hit, and the seltzer sort of boom really took off, which actually cut into a lot of craft beer, craft cider, craft wine as an alternative for that, because of the caloric intake and the fact that everybody was stuck at home and drinking a bottle of wine every other night type thing. So we saw a bit of those changes, and now as things open up again, we're starting to wonder where things are going. Do you see, does that sort of follow with what you've seen, and where do you see yourself going in the next little while?
I agree with that completely. Like, the big reason, so we launched DrinkCollab as a website without really a place to even pour, because it was the middle of the pandemic, and we saw sales, and it was kind of nice. I think the big thing it's missing is that you can't get new consumers online in the same way that it is me and you sitting here talking about cider, Perry, and all those things. So I think people are going to go back to that. And the nice thing about I use wineries as an example is people love that experience of going to a winery, tasting the product. And I think that's where, if we're talking strictly Ontario, you're going to win is having that 5 acres planted right out there, and your cidery, a nice welcoming staff, whether it's your cider maker or some retail staff that's passionate about the industry. That is where you're going to move towards. And I think everybody being locked in their houses for 2 years are itching to get out. And I mean, like, the world's not, it seems like it's more normal, but we're still not quite there. So people might not want to fly to a different destination, and they want to be vacationing somewhere closer to home. And so I think if we can really tap into that, come down and see our local cidery, I think that's going to stay. I'm very much a locavore myself. Like, I just try and move local, like, food wise. There's actually some really cool grocers down in St. Catharines, so I try to stay away from big box stores and all that stuff. I think that mentality isn't something that fades quickly, and once people experience it, then they go, oh my God, yeah, we do really make good wine here, we make good cider here. Why am I going to go somewhere else? And I don't think we're going to win in the bulk, cheap market, but that's also not really what I think Canada in general is about. We're more focused on that craft style. And me personally, I'm happy to pay for $4 tall boys from local breweries as opposed to going to the store and trying to find something for closer to $1, right? I know the quality's there and I'm happy there. I don't think I'm the normal consumer, maybe not, but I think people are gonna be excited with the weather coming up being nicer, and then that want to get outside, and that there's tons of options now that I think people are gonna stay supporting local, because I still don't think our supply chain issues are really that fixed from trying to source glass and other stuff. The LCBO shelves are a little more empty than they usually are, and so that might keep people pushing to go to local places.
And that, again, return home experience, what's in your backyard in a different sense is really important. I think Canadians really understand that as well with the way that the world currently is, and that we should be looking to support it and stay close. We're going to take a walk through the back in a bit, you said. Tell me just a little bit about this one here, but first, Perry.
I never even went. We were talking about so many things.
So tell me about the Perry, and then tell me a little bit about the other one you got here.
And so me being, my brand is just Perry at the moment. So I actually did a spiel with our marketing guy about what makes Perry different. And so there's going to be generalizations here, so please don't take it too seriously, because when you get down to the craft cider, it is almost as much like wine, with there's different varietals of apples, there's different varietals of pears. So like, talk to the people you're getting your product from, and they'll be happily go into detail. For mine, it's more about the tequila barrels and the gin. So it's just Niagara pears, a mix of non-heritage varietals. So it's Boston and Bartlett, and I'm not afraid to say that. It's fine. We're not going for single varietal pairs with that. It's more about the cool, funky labels, the delicious, and then that little bit of add-on, what I call eclectic. But the big thing that's nice about Perry, and where it really differentiates from cider, is there are unfermentable sugars. So there's difference in acids, difference in flavors, different in tannins, but the big thing that makes it very different is the residual sugar that ends up, because the yeast can't actually turn it into alcohol. Where that comes in with bottle conditioning is, as I mentioned before, you're putting yeast, sugar, fermenting it inside the bottle. You end up with a product that has residual sugar even when you can do the bottle conditioning. So we can do that traditional style, but end up with something with more body, more texture at the finished, and not as dry and crisp as its cider counterparts. So that's kind of the big fun thing I find with Perry, is you can do the bottle conditioning and you still have a little bit of sugar. I'm not talking about a lot. It's usually around 2 to 3 grams, so it's not going to change your world in terms of your sugar intake, but it's going to make a difference on that palate. And I always associate it with, that increased body, a little bit more texture, and softening of the acids. So that's my, apart from flavor differences, that's the big difference between Perry and cider.
Yeah. And we find that your products that you've had have been more flavorful than a lot of other Perrys, because they're hard to get the flavor to pop as much. You do get those other elements, but they tend to make the product a little softer overall. So it's really nice to see, the offerings that you've made, especially with the tequila on side of it. It balances with that flavor and really sort of elevates the overall taste to it. So it's a nice option. Not saying some of the other Perrys around aren't great, but they come with their own different expanse, just like cider, just like wine, just like beer.
Well, one of the things I will say from a production standpoint is very reductive ferments. So they stink when they're fermenting, and it's just it's a nutrient thing, a tannin thing. There's not a lot for the yeast to feast on. So it was a lot of work, basically, when I was making this Perry. It's barrel fermenting. I would recommend anybody who's trying to do it. Tank ferments might be a little bit easier to do this, but there's lots of oxygen management. So during the ferment, for the yeast, oxygen is going to help them move out of that reductive atmosphere, which is associated with reduced notes, a little bit of stink, a little bit of funk, sometimes people call it. And so we were actually basically using an aquarium bubbler with a little filter out of it, and a sparge stone to sanitize that in each barrel every day for the entirety of the ferment. We're doing about 20 minutes of sparging with air, which is actually pretty significant, and you don't see a lot of the oxidative nature in there because the ferment is so reduced that it just kind of helps freshen the aromas. So I think that's where I kind of got a little bit more of that fruity flavor development in bottle, and why they ended up a little cleaner than you might find some other perries. But that's not always the case. Again, it depends on what fruit you're doing, but perry ends up being doesn't settle out. It's very thick. And that's just like if you can picture biting into an apple versus biting into a pear, it's a very different experience, right? And so that's one thing where I find it hides the aromas a little bit.
And a little extra labor intensive too to go through that process as well. So very neat.
And then for me, I'm not going to say that I've been making cider for ages. I haven't. It's very much a learning experience for me. So I'm happy to share that info and talk about it in detail. We'll go through the russet and then we'll take a little walk. So the russet was just, again, using bright tanks like a brewery and doing that fermentation in the tank, filtering through. This is the Old Ton single varietal. I hate picking favorites, but the floral element of the russet apple just we've made a couple ciders together, and I've watched him make a lot of stuff. I've been a bit avid drinker of the Old Ton. This one was probably my favorite, just again, that floral quality kind of knocked my socks off. Same thing, dry, that's kind of the shtick for Old Ton. And then, going through that process so it's filtered in bottle and nice and clear. The other one here at the table, I had mentioned Chudley's. So we were just... they have an incredible apple source, just like
big family farm.
So much. Like apples, you can't even dream how many apples and varieties they have. So this is actually called a Kerr, Kerr, and they almost look like crab apples. They're the tiniest little apples. They're like $3 a pound at the grocery store for the smallest little things. But if you ever see them, oh my God, they're delicious. And so Will, being adventurous, really wanted to try making cider out of that. So we've done, again, a lot of bottle conditioning. So we brought our little setup up there. It's just basically what we call a bottling cow. It's got 6 spigots on it, beer pump to pump in the liquid, and then we just bottle that with the culture mixing as we go. So let's just do that quick, and then we'll walk around the cellar. It will be noisy in there, so I don't know if you want to stop the podcast at that point or just edit out the sound. Completely up to you. So lots of bubbles, not overflowing, always the goal. And this one is where I would say lots of reduction at the start, early in its life. So again, with that bottle conditioning, when I'm going to do my pear, I'm going to bottle the pink perry next week. Like I said, that's not going to release for at least a month. Needs at least a couple weeks for the yeast to actually do the ferment, eat the sugar, but then it needs a little bit of time to figure out what it wants to be, and so like that exists in almost every beverage. We call it bottle shock. It's pretty normal, so giving it a little bit of time. The last time I had this, I'm actually going to just grab a glass real quick.
Yes, good idea.
It was showing off big reduction, but I'm hoping at this point that it's kind of dialing in and figuring out what it wants to be. And so one thing with reduction, if you give your glass a nice swirl or shake, it usually blows off. Oh yeah, that's figuring it. So that gorgeous apple smell and then that crisp flavor, it's literally what the apples taste like, and probably one of the more exciting things I'm seeing. So not released yet, probably say June. They'll have it on their shelves when they open up for the summer.
Yeah.
And so just another thing we do, again, being contract winemakers, contract cider consultants, doing our own stuff. We're always keeping busy and finding new things to do. And that's one fun one.
So if people want to get more information on what you do or maybe reach out to work with you or so, how would they get that?
Cool. We finally, again, starting a business in the middle of the pandemic. So DrinkCollab started March 2020. Great timing. I'm glad we can laugh about that right now. But it was trying to figure out what we were how to communicate in a very new world that we weren't really experiencing. So I finally got an email up and running. So if you want to contact me personally, I do have business cards at my desk. I'll grab them, but it's winemaker at DrinkCollab.ca. And if you want to shoot any questions, that would probably be the place to go, because if you want to make products with us, That's probably the best place. And I'm just the other one would be Nick, who's our brand and marketing manager. Although he's very humble, he does some winemaking himself too. We're going to be releasing a wine brand for him fairly shortly. But he would just be Nick at DrinkCollab.ca, which are the email addresses. And then if you go on DrinkCollab.ca, you can find some information, and there should be a contact us on that as well. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of me, and I try to check that email regularly.
Awesome. And just to finish off, you said you had something you were thinking of putting out later this year. Can you give us a sneak peek about that?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about it just in case the noise is a little too wild in there. We've got our chiller going. It's a CO2 chiller, so environmentally friendly and very efficient, but unfortunately really loud and echoes on all of the metal siding and metal tanks that are in there. So I had mentioned another pairing going on there. I made a Syrah Rosé, which is, if you want to taste that as well, we can go through that. But when I press the grapes to get the juice, because when we make rosé, there's a couple ways to do it, but I did it in a traditional way where you pick the grapes, press the juice off after letting them sit with the skins for a little bit, and that gives you a nice pink color. Instead of just throwing those skins out, I put them in a tank and filled it up with about 500 liters of perry and just let that ferment. It came off as this nice pink color, so I'm just working on the final steps. It just got filtered, and then we'll end up warming it up, filling it full of yeast and sugar next week and bottling it down. So it's Syrah skins in a perry. It's going to be bright pink is the goal for the end of it. And I like to put little blurbs on my back labels. This one's a watermelon daydream, and for me it's just those red fruit notes that you wouldn't expect mingling in with the perry. Again, going bottle condition, so it's going to be as dry as the perry will go. We'll probably end up with a couple grams of sugar, but going to be in the little stubbies and nice and pink. Cool. Let's go take a walk. Let's just grab one more, get it out of the tank. Nondescript in terms of varietals and all that. But yeah. There's our noisy chiller. You might catch Emily here. Unless she's hiding on me. This is quick and easy access. And perfect, she's still got her glass, so I'll pour a little bit for you. Pour a little bit for me. Get the last ones. Cool.
Thank you.
So again,
it absolutely very much like a watermelon red flavor, pink,
kind of nailed the color, which is enjoyable. I mean, always having these little brainchilds and having them come to fruition is always a lovely experience. But I kind of intentionally picked Syrah because it's one of the darkest grapes you can get. Like, you press that stuff off, even if you don't leave it to soak on the skins, the rosé's coming off that dark purple color. So I thought it was the right choice. Now, this is dry without any carbonation in it, so the next steps, it's basically ready to go. So it's just getting a little bit of sugar in there, again about 9 grams per liter, putting a bit of yeast, fermenting a bottle. I expect a little bit of the color is going to drop out, but it's just going to be sitting in that yeast, so you're going to have that nice little pink color on the bottom anyways. So I'm not too picky about what the color is going to end up like. So if it's this, if it's a little bit paler, that's what I'm going for.
Very nice.
So you're going to have a cool name for it like you did the other two?
That is the good. So you guys are familiar with rosés from Provence. I will do the release officially on this. It's called Père Vanchal, as a little bite on Provençal style rosés. Another reason for using the Syrah grapes. And yeah, I'm nerdy about puns and doing that, so I've really set a goal for doing all of them as that, and I will happily say I don't feel like I'm scripting on this one. I feel like it's good and fits well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is a lot of notes I'm not familiar with, so it's very unique and really good.
Like the pear, again, just sneaking in there, and then a lot of that red fruit taking over the aromatics is kind of cool.
That's really nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the walkthrough and be able to chat. yeah, we'll put this up on the website and share it out, and you can listen to it all over again, and hopefully some others
Edit
will.
it.
Yeah, I'll probably listen to it a little bit too much and think, oh, maybe I should have said that a bit better, but it's okay. And,
what everyone says.
yeah, I'm sure it's true. But yes, thank you for coming out, and I appreciate, doing what you do is really exciting, and I'm excited to actually have these face-to-face meetings with a couple more people, because we've got a lot of people shouting out cider, and again, like you said, it's just so much more options. Many more producers in Ontario at this point, and then as well as Canada on a whole. Have you gone out to BC? Any plans to do that or anything?
We might do out east this year, depends on that sort of process. I've been out west to BC a couple times, but not since we've been as involved in all of the cider stuff as well. So
I'm going out in August because I have two brothers out there. One's going to UVic, and the other one is a marine biologist on the coast of Vancouver Island. So I've got a little in and a reason to go out there. But you can be sure I'm going to be trying a lot of stuff on my trip. So,
absolutely.
Thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Happy to talk with you.